Dr. Kashey here, and I just got back from a pretty long walk thinking about some stuff, and I realized that there's a lot of things that people do to distract themselves from pain. And sometimes when you feel a strong negative emotion, the first thing that comes to mind is to try and use something to mask it. And for a lot of people, myself included, I deal with these things internally as well, as to try and use food to mask some negative feeling, using sweets or something nice and crunchy and salty and savory to try and distract yourself and maybe calm down a little bit, or have a little bit of a high to try and regulate with the low, whatever analogy you want to use. And it's not difficult to put yourself in the position to feel like feeling negative emotions should be avoided at all costs because of what you do to cope with those things. So sometimes it's like, well, maybe if I just avoid it completely, if I never feel negative ever, then I won't have to do the things that backfire on me.
You have got to be kidding me.
First, I'd like to pose a question. If you had high amounts of negative emotional tension and you didn't eat, what would you do? What would happen? Or what would happen if you had a massive amount of negative emotional tension, but you were in a situation or place where food wasn't available to eat? And so if your first gut response, pun intended, to try and mask a negative emotion is to eat, what would happen if there wasn't any food around? How would you feel then? What happens when enough time passes? I'm sure you've had an experience like this, where you were just feeling absolutely terrible. A situation where if you were at home or maybe in another area, you would have had the opportunity to eat something and to start that cycle. But you also probably had an experience where you had high amounts of negative emotional tension and weren't able to eat something either. How would you feel if you did have access to the types of food you wanted during the state like that all day? If you felt like that all day, how would you feel to access to the types of food you wanted? Versus how would you feel if you didn't have access to the food you wanted? That's not a rhetorical question, I'm totally serious. Pull from one of those experiences where maybe you didn't have access to the types of foods you would normally consume and you have high amounts of emotional stress. Take advantage of that memory and record it, rewrite it. You'll be able to draw from it. Feeling compelled and having a strong desire to eat doesn't mean you need to, but it sure feels like you need to. It's important to note that feelings are feelings, good or bad, strong or weak. It's not inherently negative. It's not inherently positive either. It's just what happens when you're a human. Humans feel things, and you require those feelings to live. Feelings that feel bad are actually quite useful, and I do think they should get some attention that they deserve, because if bad feelings went around, bad things would definitely happen, and maybe you'd never be drawn to them. Attention would never be drawn to the negative things that had happened, and you'd never have any good feelings either. And so being able to embrace that you have the capacity to feel and tolerate all the emotions is of critical importance. And it's really the cornerstone of, probably one of the cornerstones of what makes us humans. And if you just felt the positive emotions, they really wouldn't be positive. They would just be bleh. And bleh is a technical term, by the way. What comes up must come down. Extreme amounts of tension or extreme valleys, lows, everything will eventually equalize. And thankfully this happens even if you don't do anything about it. That's an interesting thing about feelings. Even when things feel terrible, you'll still live, and that's good. High amounts of emotional tension, feeling negative about it, that's not inherently bad. This is communication, and really part of what makes you you, and part of what makes you human. Doing something to try and get rid of them is not inherently productive. You will get a peak, but you also will get a trough, and things will stabilize, even if you don't do anything about it at all. Any tools you employ to try and get rid of negative feelings will at best be a distraction, which is not inherently bad either. Distractions can be good. It's important to know that if you're going to use a method to distract yourself from negative feelings, that the result is whatever distraction method you use does not end up swapping whatever negative feeling you have for another negative feeling to keep the cycle going. Like I said, if you look back to previous parts of your life, you're going to find a multitude of examples where you were able to survive high amounts of negative emotional stress just fine and not having to include food in that at all. In fact, in my personal experiences, the tons of other people I've worked with, firsthand and secondhand and thirdhand even, and a lot of the research I've consumed, it shows that time is the biggest factor here. Not any particular method to solve the negative amounts of emotional tension. It's time. This is why distraction can be of critical importance, because a distraction is used to pass time. A distraction is not used to solve a problem. However, if a problem is high amounts of negative emotional stress, then time, I really think, is the best treatment. This is good because there are plenty of options to distract yourself and take up time, and not all of them contain calories. Many of them are calorie-free. Next time something really crappy happens, or you're feeling like you're just really down in the dumps, I think it's important that you can really set yourself a timer. Set a 30-minute timer, just chill out, whatever that means to you, and see what happens when that 30 minutes is up. I highly recommend you go for a walk. I'm always going to suggest walking. Even if it doesn't feel like anything happens after that 30 minutes, during your nice walk, do you think that negative feeling will keep increasing into infinity until the world explodes? Or your organs just turn into tapioca from an insane stress response? Or do you think whatever the feeling is will eventually subside and even out? Consider it. So I want a summary here. Attempting to use food as a method to distract yourself from negative emotions generally ends up with more negative emotions. And now you have the option to break that cycle. Sometimes, most times, time is really the best treatment. Find things that don't contain calories to pass the time. That's probably the time heals all wounds, closes them up. You can do it. You are doing it.